Welcome to the Center for Diversity Leadership, where we are supporting school leaders together across the nation as they create school cultures that ensure all students are seen, valued, celebrated, and heard. I am Dr. Edgardo Castro, and my co-fellow, Dr. Ryan Daniel, she's not here today, and we are the fellows in this work. We are so fortunate today. Our amazing, excellent guest today is Dr. Jennifer Haan. She is actually the assistant professor, coordinator of Masters in Education in Educational Leadership Programs, director of online and distance education, Sul Ross State University. Dr. Haan, I am so pleased, and this is such an excellent moment for you to really deep dive the intersectionality of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness. I know your background. I was one of your students in the graduate program at NMSU. I am so proud of you. You are now moving on to your next chapter of your life. You are the director and, of course, in charge of that educational leadership programs. This interview should be just fluid, but let me just ask you this first question. Share with us, our podcast participants and listeners, how the intersectionality of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness relates or connects to a person's background and experiences. And of course, feel free to share your Japanese, Korean, American heritage. Thank you, Dr. Haan.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Castro, for inviting me. I was really excited to hear about the topic for this podcast, which was about the intersectionality of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness. And a lot of times we don't hear that last term of belongingness, but I think that's one of the most important terms that we can use when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, that sense of belonging. That's what relates to and aligns with the concept of intersectionality. So a little bit about my experience. Every person is an example of intersectionality, right? But for my experience, my intersectionality has to do with so many different things. I'm not just one thing. As a person, I'm not just one thing. I'm not just Korean American or Japanese or Asian American. I'm so many different things. So I am Japanese Korean, Japanese American, and Korean American, and I'm a middle-aged woman. I am was born in the United States. So I have my own experiences as such with racism, sexism, and ageism. And those things that are things that I experience kind of all at once. And at the same time, identity also. So as a cisgender U.S. citizen, native English speaker, I know that I have privileges that those who are transgender don't have, or those who are homeless don't have, or those who are non-citizens have. So my identity is so many different things based on gender, race, sexual identity, age, socioeconomic status, all of those things are me. So when someone looks at me as Dr. Haan, they may see one thing on the surface, but I'm really made up of so many different things that intersect. And what it's made me realize is that you don't have to belong to a group in terms of how that group defines itself in order to support and promote the principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness.
That is such a powerful example of the intersectionality, your background, your experience, Dr. Han. And wow, what a way to start this podcast. And so I know you have been a leader, a school principal, and a district leader as well at some point. How can a school K-12 leader now continues to rethink creative ideas on what DEIB means and how to apply them regularly within the community? Will you please just share with us your top one or two things to prioritize the goals and objectives as a school leader?
Yes, absolutely. It's such a difficult task, right? To be responsible for bringing alive the principles of DEIB, right? So I think the best way that a leader can apply those principles is to embed those principles into everything that you do as a campus leader. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness should be a mindset that you use to develop everything from your professional development goals, student achievement goals, to the enhancement of your campus culture. All of those things should be at the forefront of your mind as you develop goals. So they shouldn't be just things that, oh, okay, that's going to be a separate goal that I'm going to have different metrics to measure, but rather embed those and think of those in everything that you do as a campus leader. Another thing that I think is really important is for a leader to build genuine relationships with everyone on that campus. And when I mean everyone, I mean the teachers, obviously, the students, obviously, your faculty, your support staff, your groundskeepers, your parents. Everyone who's involved with that campus is a person and an individual with an identity. You want to definitely build genuine relationships with that individual. Understanding that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness is something that you espouse to and that you think everybody has an important role to play in. One more thing is that I really that leaders need to address the hard stuff. Like if there is someone who demonstrates implicit or explicit bias about certain groups, we need to address that. We can't shy away from it. We need to address that with the spirit of everybody is a learner. Everybody is learning. Each of us has so far to go in terms of our understanding of people who are different from us. And we have to be gentle and kind to ourselves, and we have to be gentle and kind to others who are on that path as well.
Wow. That's just an amazing top 3 or 5 things that to prioritize as a school leader. Thank you so much. Well, I'm sure you know the National Association of Elementary School Principals, the Center for Diversity Leadership. One of the goals and objectives to provide awareness and understanding on how diversity is celebrated in schools and within the community. Will you please share with us your experience as a K-12 principal, again, as a central officer, director, to, how to relate them when it comes to curriculum, instruction, and assessment, a triangulated version that it encompasses the CIA.
Yes. And I think the immediate go-to response is to align ourselves with sort of the national monthly celebrations. So for instance, we're finishing up February, which is Black History Month, and we're going to go into March and April, May, and June. And every month seems to have its own designated culture that we are supposed to celebrate, which I think is a really good thing because there's a place, right, where everybody's culture is celebrated. But again, I always go back to embedding the principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness in everything that we do. So whether we're a campus leader or a department leader, we need to infuse those principles into everything we do and move beyond those obvious kind of holiday or monthly celebratory occasions or recognitions. And I think in terms of curriculum instruction and assessment, I think we really need to move beyond sort of the obvious departments or subject areas in our curriculum that we feel belong to DEIB. For instance, one of the main ways that we incorporate principles in curriculum instruction assessment is through the adoption of instructional materials, right? And that's obviously very important because we need representation. Our students need representation of their identities and their sense of belongingness. They need to see themselves in the curriculum. But we need to also embed those principles in our professional development plans. And what I mean by that is to undergird our professional development initiatives with the idea that we want equity of student outcomes, regardless of student background or identity. So that needs to undergird what we do with our teachers to increase their effectiveness. And then another example would be to support DEIB principles in instructional technology implementation. So when we think of accessibility of materials or accessibility of online learning, we need to think about all of our learners who may be visually impaired or hearing impaired. We need to think of DEIB as more than just racial, ethnic, or linguistic diversity, but we also have to think about the other identities that our students have as either able-bodied people or as U.S. citizens or as LGBTQIA plus identities. So we have to think of all of those things and not just relegate those things to federal programs or just instructional materials adoption.
Wow. There are so many questions to ask, Dr. Han, and I know it's only 15 minutes. It is not enough. And because this is catered to podcast where people can hear while driving from home to their workplace, to school, I'm sure we will make a follow-up because it is just so many ideas that you're trying to share with us today. But if there's one idea that you would like to share to assistant principals out there that are listening right now, what is that? And go ahead. We have like a minute and a half.
Okay. All right. So assistant principals are such an important aspect of our campus cultures. And, I know as an assistant principal, many times we're given the duty of discipline, right? But I think we can most effectively implement DEIB principles when we implement discipline or when we handle discipline, is to ask ourselves about our own implicit biases and the assumptions that we make about students and their identity. So one example of a question you can ask yourself when you're dealing with discipline is, what is my definition of suspicious or shady behavior? We always kind of name that as a reason for following up with discipline, right? But how do we define suspicious or shady? Another question to ask ourselves is, if this student, my child, or a friend of mine's child, would I treat this child the same as I'm treating the child right now? You think about that, about the relationship you have to the child. And you need to also think about how you can address a situation without it being a disciplinary action. So I'm focusing mainly on discipline because I know that what principles do the most is discipline. And the most important thing you can do is check those implicit biases that you may have or those assumptions that you may have.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Haan, and everybody. Let's give a round of applause to Dr. Jennifer Haan. This is such a pleasure and a treat for all of us here. We will surely get in touch for you for a follow-up, if you don't mind. And this is the NASP Center for Diversity Leadership.